Okay, let's talk about the steps of the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain has the job of taking the energy in NADH and FADH2, the carrier molecules that are produced in glycolysis in the citric acid cycle, and converting that energy to ATP. Now, I talked about where this takes place in the cell at the very beginning, but now I've drawn a close-up of part of the mitochondria so that we can see what's actually happening. So this is the outside of the mitochondria, that round outer membrane. And this curvy one is the inner membrane. Outside here is the cytosol. Inside the curvy membrane is the matrix. The matrix is where the citric acid cycle takes place that produces so much NADH. Now, on this inner membrane, there are a number of enzyme complexes, 3 of them to be in fact. And these enzyme complexes help to set up a gradient that allows this channel, called an ATP synthase, to convert that energy to ATP. Remember, all enzymes have an ending of ASE, so synthase is an enzyme that helps to synthesize ATP. All right, so we've got this NADH, and I'm only going to use NADH, but the same thing happens with FADH2. This NADH comes up to the first enzyme complex and it plucks off the NAD part, leaving only what's called H-. Now, we haven't seen H- before, so let's talk about what that means. Remember that a hydrogen atom is simply a proton with an electron. Okay? And if we want to make that into H-, then we would still have the proton, but instead of 1 electron, we would have 2 electrons, and that would be H-. So we have this H- in here in the matrix. Now that H- is further broken down into H+ plus a pair of electrons. So we have the proton and then the 2 electrons, right? Proton, 2 electrons, proton, 2 electrons. So the H- is broken down into proton and 2 electrons. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So these 2 electrons bind to the first enzyme complex, and the first enzyme complex gets so much energy from that it's able to pump that proton into the intermembrane space, right? Then the electrons hop from that enzyme complex to the next enzyme complex, giving that one sufficient energy, again, to pump a proton into the intermembrane space. Finally, the electrons hop over to the third enzyme complex, giving that enzyme complex the energy to pump a proton into the intermembrane space. So this 1 pair of electrons has allowed us to move 3 protons into the intermembrane space, and that creates a high concentration of protons. Whenever we put something in brackets like this, it means concentration. So this is a high concentration of protons. Now, because we have a high concentration of protons here and a low concentration of protons here, the protons want to move through this channel to get back to where they're at low concentration. And the channel uses that flow, that rush of protons that are coming into the matrix from the intermembrane space to add phosphate groups to ATP, or to ADP. So as the protons go through, ADP swings in and picks up a phosphate group and becomes ATP. And that's the electron transport chain.